She doesn't need to raise her voice. She doesn't need to posture. She doesn't need to fight for attention. She already has it because you handed it to her the moment you mistook her softness for safety. This is where the trap begins. Not in loud arguments or overt manipulation, but in the silence between her words, the warm, yielding tone that puts your defenses to sleep, and the smile that tells you she's harmless. You want to believe it because it feels good to believe it. And so you lean in. You reveal yourself. You relax your grip on your boundaries. It's the first sacrifice. You don't notice it at first. She listens. She nods. She asks questions that make you feel seen. She calls it connection. But underneath, something else is happening. You're being profiled. Your strengths, your wounds, your emotional patterns, all of it being quietly studied. Not necessarily with malice. It's often its instinct. She doesn't even have to know she's doing it. But nature doesn't care about intentions. About results, what she gains is leverage. The kind of leverage that doesn't require volume, just access. And once she has emotional access to you, everything else becomes negotiable. Your priorities, your identity. She will never have to say the words, "Do what I want." You'll volunteer. Because in your mind, you're helping someone. Soft. Someone good. Someone incapable of harm. But softness is not innocence. Softness is not virtue. It is simply a strategy, a successful one. It lowers your guard. It slips beneath your rational defenses. It feels like intimacy, but it is. Often a transaction wrapped in warmth. The moment you assume she's incapable of power is the moment you surrender yours. Why does this matter? Because the men who get destroyed aren't brought down by obvious threats. They fall to what they couldn't even see, what they couldn't. Imagine the woman who never raised her voice. The woman who just needed help. The woman who smiled while pulling strings. And if you think this is cynical, ask yourself, who benefits when you believe that softness equals safety? Who benefits? When you lead with your empathy instead of your discernment, you don't lose to what's strong. You lose to what looks weak. You forget that nature never gave her brute force. She doesn't have your upper body strength. She didn't evolve to overpower lions or other tribes. She evolved to influence, to survive through subtlety, to control. Without appearing to, she learned to bend men not with threats, but with suggestion. Not with command, but with softness. Power, when it can't be expressed through dominance, must become indirect. And that's exactly what it became. Over tens of thousands of years, the feminine adapted not by mirroring the masculine, but by mastering an alternative strategy, influence wrapped in emotion, control veiled in care. You think this is about her personality? It's not. It's biological inheritance. Just like your impulse to provide and protect, or impulse to draw protection through vulnerability, through expression, through feigned helplessness is etched into her nervous system. You're dealing with instinct, not ideology. So when she softens her tone, when she cries in just the right moment, when she tells you she just wants to be safe, you don't recognize the ancient machinery behind it. You see a moment, miss the evolutionary code. Schopenhauer saw it with brutal clarity. He called women the embodiment of nature's will, uninterested in truth, only in reproduction and survival. And Carl Jung warned, what you idealize, you fail to understand. What you romanticize, you project your blind spots onto. You have been trained by culture, by media, by your own biology, to think that softness is a signal of morality. But nature doesn't deal in morality, it deals in effectiveness. And a soft woman who knows how to move you emotionally is far more effective than one who tries to overpower you. Ask yourself, what kind of power do you respect? The visible kind, the blunt kind, the loud kind. But what kind of power can manipulate you without your awareness? The quiet kind, the kind that smiles as it redirects your plans. It's the kind that slips into your decision-making and disguises itself as your idea. And that's why she wins, not because she's stronger, but because she doesn't need to be. You're the one who needs her to look harmless in order to stay blind. You're the one who demands the illusion, and she's more than willing to provide it. She doesn't need a sword. She has tears. She has silence. She has a gaze that lingers, just long enough to make you feel responsible. Vulnerability, when sincere, can build deep connection. But when performed, when strategically deployed, it becomes a weapon. One you won't even realize you've surrendered to until you're already bleeding. You're trained to respond to female vulnerability. It lights up the circuits in your brain wired for protection, provision, significance. She doesn't need to command your attention, she just needs to appear as if she's hurting. The more emotionally intelligent she is, the more precisely she knows when to appear wounded, misunderstood, or unsafe. And the more emotionally unresolved you are, the more likely you are to interpret her performance as truth. It doesn't matter whether it's deliberate or subconscious. The effect is the same. You become her emotional bodyguard. You enter the trance. You believe you're the strong one, and in some ways you are. But your strength has been hijacked, because now it's in service of her narrative, her safety, her approval. Why does this happen? Because you confuse pain with honesty. You assume that emotion equals truth. But Carl Jung knew better, he warned. That emotion is often the camouflage of the shadow, the place where manipulation hides behind the mask of sincerity. Her trembling voice doesn't mean she's right. Her sadness doesn't mean she's innocent. It means she's human, especially intelligent ones. Learn how to get what they need. You don't blame a child for crying to get attention. But what happens when that child becomes an adult with the same strategy? What happens when she cries not to connect, but to control the room? When she turns vulnerability into a throne and demands your loyalty through pity, you obey. What happens? You soften your tone. You silence your instincts. You override your logic. Because you've been taught, if she's hurting, it must be your fault. This is not compassion. This is compliance. And until you see the difference, you will keep confusing her weakness for goodness, and you will keep being used. You don't see her clearly. You see her through a lens that was built long before she arrived. She says a few kind words, and you melt. She withdraws slightly, and you panic. Because you're not responding to her, you're responding to the unresolved figure she unconsciously resembles, your mother. This is the mother wound. The ache left by emotional neglect, smothering, abandonment, or overprotection. The wound of a boy who was never fully seen, never fully heard. Jung called it projection, the unconscious act of assigning your inner reality to the external world. You do it with women constantly, especially women who carry that same softness, that same emotional charge, that same ability to soothe you with a glance or shatter you with distance. You don't love her, you long for her. And that longing isn't about her at all. It's about the emotional debt you've been carrying since childhood. The hunger to be mothered in exactly the way you never were. She doesn't know this. She just senses your sensitivity to her mood. She sees how quickly you respond to her approval, how easily you're wounded by her disappointment. She may even mistake this for love, but it's not love. It's compensation. You were trying to finish a story through her that she didn't write, and in doing so, you give her power she never earned. You place her on a pedestal made of your own memory fragments. You ignore red flags because she didn't mean it. You silence your gut because she's just going through something. You tolerate behavior that would never pass with anyone else, because deep down, your boy psychology believes, if I lose her, I lose the chance to finally be whole. But that is the trap. She can't mother the boy in you. And the more you ask her to, the more she will resent you or exploit you. Softness becomes her leverage because you have equated it with redemption. But she is not here to redeem your past. She is here, like anyone else, for her own reasons. And those reasons may have nothing to do with your healing until you see her. As she is not as your fantasy, not as your projection, you are not in a relationship. You are in a psychological reenactment, and it will end the same way every time, with disappointment, confusion. It's in a deeper wound than before. Her softness only disarms you because it reflects something you haven't claimed in yourself. Not just tenderness, but your own fragility. Your own yearning, your secret wish to be rescued. to be relieved of the pressure to always know, always lead, always hold the frame. And when she offers softness, you don't just accept it, you collapse into it. You think it's love. You call it chemistry. But often it's relief. Relief from your own strength. Because strength, when it's not grounded in clarity, becomes a prison. And you mistake her softness for freedom. But here's the truth. The part of you that longs for her. Nurturing is the part of you that refuses to grow up. The boy who wants a woman to soothe him is the man who has not fully claimed his own interior authority. You reach for her softness because you haven't yet found your own inner peace. Her calm becomes your drug, her care becomes your compass. And now, without realizing it, she's leading not through dominance, but through your dependency. What happens when she withdraws that softness? You spiral. You second-guess yourself. You text more. You try harder. Because you weren't connecting with her. You were clinging to what she reflected in you. And now that it's gone, you feel empty. Not because she changed, but because you outsourced your center to her presence. Jung wrote that the things we repress in ourselves return through projection, often in the form of fascination. The more you repress your own vulnerability, the more you'll become addicted to hers. Not as an equal, but as a consumer. You consume her emotional energy. You become the beggar at the altar of her affection. She feels this whether consciously or not, and she will use it, or she will resent it, or both. Softness is not the enemy. But if it unravels you, it's revealing where you're unintegrated. If it seduces you into compromise, it's exposing your lack of internal structure. She is not the cause of your weakness. She is the mirror of it. And until you build the kind of strength that doesn't require constant reassurance, every soft woman will hold the power to break you. She doesn't say, "Save me," not directly. She just lets you see her uncertainty. She lets her voice tremble. At the right time, she asks for your opinion, then hesitates just long enough to trigger your protector instinct. It works, every time. Because she knows something most men don't. Helplessness is magnetic when wielded with precision. You think she's fragile? You think she's lost. But in reality, she's orchestrating the dynamic, placing herself below you so that you reach down. And the moment you reach down, you create an emotional hierarchy. You rise into the role of the savior, the fixer. It's the man who knows. And it feels good at first, but it's not leadership. It's emotional manipulation in disguise. Because the moment you commit to saving her, she owns you. Not with force, but with dependence. You've staked your identity on being her rock. Now, your worth is tied to her perpetual instability. She doesn't have to grow because your growth depends on her staying weak. And this is where the seduction becomes a cycle. She remains helpless to keep your attention. You remain useful to keep her approval. Why does this pattern repeat? Because you confuse being needed with being valued. You believe her weakness makes you strong. But true strength doesn't require a damsel. It doesn't need someone to rescue. It just is. Schopenhauer would call this the delusion of masculine. Vanity, the belief that you can save someone from herself. But nature isn't sentimental. It rewards the appearance of need because it activates your biology. And she, consciously or not, is playing a game that biology designed long before. You learn the word codependent. Eventually, you'll notice something chilling. She's not really changing. She doesn't want to. The more you give, the more she needs. The more you help, the more problems arise. And slowly, the burden shifts from her life to yours. From her emotional storms to your responsibility for them. She never needed saving. She needed control. Helplessness gave it to her. Your power is not tested when a woman challenges you. Your power is tested when she leans in softly and whispers, "I just don't know what to do." That's when you decide, am I her savior? Or am I my own sovereign? Because the moment you choose her helplessness over your clarity, you lose. Both, she thanks you. She encourages you. She gives just enough affection to keep you close. Her tone is sweet, her eyes soft, and her presence, calming. You tell yourself you're lucky. You convince yourself this is what you've always wanted. A kind woman, a good woman, a woman who never yells, never pressures, never criticizes, but something feels off. You hesitate to speak your full mind. You pause before voicing your needs. You walk on eggshells not because she's volatile, but because she's fragile. And over time, her kindness stops feeling safe. It starts to feel heavy. It starts to feel like surveillance wrapped in sugar. You don't realize it, but you've become domesticated. Slowly, strategically, every boundary you once had has been softened. Every wild part of you has been soothed into silence. Her affection became a leash. Her approval became your oxygen. And now you don't move unless she smiles. How did this happen? Because you believed that control only looks like force. Forgot that the most effective form of dominance is emotional. Can't fight what doesn't look like an attack. Can't argue with a whisper, so you conform quietly, politely. Progressively, you sacrifice your edge to preserve her peace. This is how kindness becomes a cage. Velvet prison that doesn't restrain your body but captures your spirit. You stop taking risks. You stop telling the truth. You begin to censor yourself in the name of love. And she rewards that behavior with more warmth, more softness. It's positive reinforcement, behavioral psychology. She is shaping you, and here's the part you refuse to admit. You let her, because it's comfortable. Because her affection feels better than your solitude. Because being liked feels easier than being free. But Jung reminds us anything that compromises individuation. Anything that blurs the distinction between self and other leads to shadow. And the man who becomes small to avoid conflict will one day resent the woman who trained him to shrink. She didn't put you in a cage. You walked in willingly, because it was lined with kindness, because it felt like home. But you were not born to be tamed. You were born to see clearly even when softness tries to blur your vision. You tell yourself you're choosing peace. You say, she makes me feel calm. But calm is not always clarity. Sometimes it's sedation. Sometimes it's the slow death of your direction in exchange for the warm blanket of emotional approval. And that's what you've chosen, not love, not growth, but comfort. Because it's easier than holding your ground. Comfort feels like safety. But for a man, too much safety becomes a coffin. You weren't designed to live under the thumb of emotional peacekeeping. You were built to stand in tension, to move through discomfort, to assert, to challenge. And yet when softness enters, you lay down your sword. Why? Because power demands solitude. It demands rejection. It demands the risk of standing alone. Most men, if they're honest, would rather be held than be whole. They would rather be praised than be principled. And so they abandon their edge for her softness, trade their vision for her affection. It begins small. You skip the gym to stay in bed. You silence your truth to keep the mood light. You stop leading because she says she doesn't want control, but punishes you every time you take it. And so, you hesitate. You check her face before you speak. You shrink. You don't call it submission, but you call it being understanding. But underneath, something darker is growing. Self-betrayal, quiet, daily, rotting the bones of your masculine identity. By the time you notice it, it's too late. You've molded yourself into the version of you that she finds least threatening. You are no longer a man. You are her mirror. Schopenhauer warned us. Love, for many men, is not about the other, it's about escaping the self. And you thought she would save you from your inner war. But she only offered you a ceasefire in her terms. You handed over the kingdom for the illusion of peace. But here's the brutal truth.
How?
Any power you abandon for comfort will be used against you. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow. But the moment you try to reclaim it, she will say, you've changed, and she'll be right. You have. You gave up your sovereignty to avoid discomfort, and now, the only way back is through war with yourself. You thought she was gentle. You thought she was pure. You thought her softness meant safety. But the softness was never neutral. It was directional. It moved you, shaped you, redirected you. And now you feel distant from yourself, like a stranger performing a script to you. Didn't write, that's the cost. Not a broken heart, not betrayal. Something worse. Self-erasure. Every time you ignored your instincts to preserve the connection. Every time you rationalized her passive aggression as sensitivity. Every time you suppressed your truth to protect her feelings. You trained yourself to disappear, and she helped. Not because she's evil, but because you let her think. That softness worked. You reinforced the game. You rewarded the weapon. You didn't lose because she was cunning. You lost because you needed the illusion. You needed to believe she was incapable of control because that made it easier to justify your submission. You needed her to stay soft because you were tired of being sharp. But life doesn't let you keep that lie forever. Eventually, she becomes restless. You've bent yourself to please her, and now she doesn't respect you. She feels your hesitance, your passivity, your buried resentment, and she loses attraction. Because even she can't admire the version of you that you sculpted for her now. You feel confused. You did everything right. You were kind, patient, empathetic, but she's pulling away and you don't understand why. The answer is brutal. Because you stopped being someone worth following. You became agreeable instead of grounded, predictable instead of powerful. And she, even unconsciously, punished you for it. You thought love meant always giving. But real love has boundaries. Real love has friction. Real love requires the risk of being disliked for being honest. And you couldn't take that risk. So now, she doesn't trust you. Not because you were cruel, but because you were fake. Jung called this the failure to individuate, to become your own person. Whole and defined. And when you don't, you attract relationships that reflect your lack of self. Relationships that demand performance, not presence. The cost of not seeing her clearly is not about her. It's about you. It's about how far you drift from your center in the name of connection, and how quietly, invisibly, that distance ruins you. You don't need to hate her. You need to see her. Not through the fog of your projections, not through the lens of your needs, but with clarity. Her softness is not evil. It is not divine. It is a form of power. And like any power, it can heal or it can bind. But you will never know which. Until you no longer need it. That's the final test. Can you hold your center in the presence of what once unmade you? Can you remain unmoved when she uses silence like a scalpel? Can you say no without explanation, without anger, without guilt, just because it's true? Because the moment you stop chasing her softness, it loses its leverage. The game collapses. And for the first time, you might actually see her not as a fantasy, not as a mirror, but as a human being with strategies, shadows, instincts. In agency, you may find her manipulative. You may find her scared. You may find her lost in patterns she doesn't fully understand. But now, you see clearly. And in clarity, you have power not over her, but over yourself. Most men never get here. They stay trapped in cycles of idealization and resentment, worshipping softness, then blaming it when they feel betrayed. But it's not her fault. It never was. She used what worked. You let it work. And now, if you want out, it's not about changing her. It's about changing your relationship to the dynamic. Jung would say this is the moment of individuation. The end of the boy's search for a mother in every lover. The end of the man's addiction to being needed. The beginning of psychological adulthood. Because once you see the weapon for what it is, you stop handing it to her. You stop inviting it. You stop building cages and calling them homes. You reclaim your edge. You hold your line. Speak the truth even when it costs you affection. And in doing so, you become sovereign, not above her, not beneath her, but beyond the illusion. There's a moment when a man must stop asking why she changed and start asking when he stopped being true to himself. You're not here to decode every flicker of her emotion. You're not here to win approval through submission. You're here to become someone no illusion can manipulate because you see through it. This is the work of individuation, carving away of every lie you told yourself to feel safe, every role you played to feel needed, every story you clung to that made weakness look like virtue. Softness is not your enemy, but your blindness to its potential as leverage, that's the real danger. Once you become psychologically sovereign, you no longer fear her power. You respect it, you observe it, and you respond from grounded choice, not reflexive programming. That's when love becomes real. That's when presence replaces performance. That's when your masculinity stops being reactive. It starts becoming strategic. Because in a world designed to confuse comfort with connection, the man who sees clearly becomes unbreakable. If this struck a nerve, good. That means you're waking up. Share this video with someone who still thinks kindness can't be a weapon. Like, comment. Speak your truth below. Men need to hear this urgently, and some part of you already knew it.
Act like it.